feel safe and secure in the bosom of our family. But sometimes, that's where darkness lies. A golden child leads a double life.
I don't know if we've ever seen a person like her.
You'll stay or you'll go.
A loving stepmother turns truly wicked.
Seeds of hate just started to sprout deep down inside.
And a sister's care masks heartless greed.
There's a special place in hell for people who prey on the infirm.
Toronto, Canada, 2000. 14-year-old Jennifer Pan is ready to be named junior high valedictorian.
How do you like your trophy?
She was the top of her class. Her teacher said she was one of the best students he ever had.
And her proud parents, Han and Bick, are counting on it.
Jennifer's parents put tremendous pressure on her to achieve at a wide variety of activities.
In particular, when it came to education, they were very, very firm on acquiring an education.
It's my great pleasure to announce this year's middle school valedictorian.
To Jennifer, the announcement is a mere formality.
She believed that she was going to win.
Rebecca Johnson.
And she didn't.
I'm so sorry. I thought
Her parents want so much for their daughter, and she hasn't delivered.
She was devastated. She thought, what's the point? All of this hard work?
It's not her only secret.
Hey, are you okay?
Can't breathe.
When she's 16, she suffers an asthma attack. And fellow student Danny Wong comes to her aid.
In and out.
It was Daniel that came out of the woodwork, so to speak, to help her regain her breathing.
And from that point on, it was almost as if he was her savior.
Her parents have forbidden her from dating, but Jennifer is smitten.
Thank you for saving my life.
Anytime.
Jennifer fell into a deep and desperate love with him.
If I'm in the brass section.
Her parents can't find out she has a boyfriend, especially not this one.
Danny Wong was a dealer. It wasn't as if he was just selling one joint. He was selling a quantity of marijuana.
And before long, 2 secrets become 3, with her biggest lie yet.
Mom, must we?
this is a moment in history.
What Jennifer did was fabricate an entire university career.
You're the first in our family to go to the university.
Oh, Daddy, are you crying?
She gets all her books prepared. She has new clothing.
This is something to surprise you.
Parents buy her a laptop.
I know I have been tough on you these days.
For Han and Bick, their daughter going to the university is a momentous occasion.
Then she exits the front door, and as far as her parents know, she's going to her first day of university.
But she wasn't. She'd spent much of her time with Danny Wong and never did attend school because she was never enrolled.
Her parents think she's living with a girlfriend near the campus.
She began leading a double life, spending many nights a week with Daniel.
Hey, Dad, I'm in class.
Just want to check if you're coming home this weekend.
No, I'm volunteering at the hospital, remember?
How's that going?
Good. I gotta go. Bye.
But in 2008, she tells one lie too many.
Jennifer told her father that she was volunteering at a hospital as part of her university degree.
Okay, thanks, Dad.
Wait. We want to say where you work.
You can't. It's a sterile area, so I'll just get out here. Jenny!
But her father is becoming suspicious.
So he insisted one day on driving her to the hospital.
She bolted from the car and hid for 2 hours while her parents looked for her.
Excuse me, our daughter is working in this hospital as a volunteer. So do you know where can we find her?
Her name is Jenny.
This magnificent tapestry of lies that Jennifer had woven for herself was bound to come apart sooner or later.
I'm sorry, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have volunteers at this hospital.
And it did.
She has been lying to us.
Toronto, Canada. Since high school, Jennifer Pan has been lying to her parents.
You have brought disgrace on this family for the last time.
They blame her boyfriend Danny for leading her astray and ban all contact.
But you have to swear.
Her father said to her, "If you see Daniel again, it will be over my dead body."
While I'm still alive, you will never see that boy again.
Don't ever say that to a crazy, angry kid.
But lying comes naturally to Jennifer.
She lived at her parents' house, and she continued to see Danny Wong behind her parents' back.
She wants to be with Daniel without parental interference. She plans to speed up her hefty inheritance.
Jennifer was the mastermind. She came up with the idea of hitmen coming to kill her parents in a grand, sort of phony home invasion.
This is my parents' life insurance policy. We could be together if you found someone to do it.
Danny Wong, in fact, given his criminal background,
I've got someone.
had known over time some people that he believed were capable of carrying out the murders.
November 8th, 2010. The Pan family settle in for the night.
Good night, Mom. Night.
Jennifer walked downstairs, gave her mother a hug, unlocked the door.
Jennifer then sends a signal to her hitmen.
The light in the Pan household, in Pan's study, goes on for exactly 1 minute and turns off. Minutes later, 3 men rush into the home. Vic has a man with a gun to her head.
Get up! Get up! Get up! Get up now!
Pan is rousted out of bed at gunpoint, where he sees his daughter. She was bound to a banister.
The parents are taken down to the basement, and the men throw blankets on their head.
She heard a noise that she describes as popping noises. She shot multiple times. Ultimately, the last shot is to the back of the head.
Jennifer begins the final phase of her plan, playing the distraught victim.
Help me, please. I need help.
Jennifer started calling 911 after the men had run out of the home.
Please hurry.
Help! Help!
What she didn't expect to hear is her father rising up from the basement, moaning and groaning and screaming.
Dad, are you okay? Help is coming.
The bullet traveled through his face, down his neck, missed a very important artery. He ended up surviving. To find his wife of 30 years dead.
Suddenly, Jennifer's plan goes off the rails.
You could hear Handpan on the 911 call, obviously moaning as he escaped out of the house.
Han is rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Jennifer gives police her version of the events, but it will be some time before they can speak to her father.
He was in a coma for days.
Jennifer.
He told the police that Jennifer appeared to be familiar with one of the intruders. Han said that the intruder was actually consoling Jennifer.
Jennifer tries to lie her way out of trouble one last time.
She told the police that she had hired the men to come into her parents' home and kill her. But somehow or other, there was a miscommunication, and they killed her parents instead. I don't buy it, and the police didn't either.
The police search her phone and find hundreds of text messages spelling out the murder plot. Envy is a curse.
She just festered with resentment.
This wicked stepmother
There were plenty of warning signs.
is conjuring
A sad ending to a sad and desperate life.
Brooklyn, New York, 1892.
And then the wicked witch said to her wolves, "See those people over there?
42-year-old Martha Garrison loves her new job.
That little girl. I want you to tear her to
She's been
shreds."
hired to look after 12-year-old Ida Place.
That's all for tonight.
It did seem that Martha was going to be a good addition to the family. She seemed to take care of the young girl very well.
Ida's mother died recently. Now Ida is her father William's whole world.
Oh,
You two are getting on well.
she is so lovely.
I haven't seen her this happy in a long time.
William Place was a widower. He was very successful, had his own business, owned a home in Brooklyn.
Well, good night, Mr. Place.
Good night, Maddie.
And I think he needed that mother figure for his daughter, and he found that in Martha when she came to work for him.
It's not long before Martha is the cornerstone of the home.
Martha, have you seen my green necktie?
It's in your top drawer, Mr. Place.
No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. Thank you.
She was, by all accounts, a very meticulous and tidy housekeeper.
Bonded with Ida and indispensable to William, Martha is sure she's found her place.
Oh, don't forget your writing slate.
Meeting William and being taken into his family was the best thing that had ever happened to Martha.
And Martha isn't the only one thinking about her future.
I've been thinking maybe we should consolidate our arrangement. What I'm trying to say is, would you like to get married?
Yes.
His desire to marry Martha was not about love, but more about having someone to take care of his young teenage daughter.
You don't have to decide now.
I would like that very much.
Yes?
Yes.
Splendid.
Martha has hit the jackpot.
Martha didn't have a lot going for her. She wasn't educated, she wasn't outgoing. For her, he was quite a catch.
Changed. Martha was always the interloper, the outsider.
Father, Edward's invited me to see the Nutcracker this Sunday evening.
Nutcracker.
It's a Russian ballet.
Not only is Martha struggling to play the lady of the house
at Carnegie Hall,
she's now finding she has competition.
You can go with Edward.
Ida was growing up. She was mouthing off to Martha, the stepmother. And deep down, I think Martha started to realize that Ida was everything she wasn't.
The more Ida blossoms, the more Martha withers with envy.
I just don't understand why you have to spend so much time with her.
Because she's my daughter?
And I'm your wife.
William wasn't paying her enough attention as a husband should a wife.
Don't tell me you're jealous of your own stepdaughter.
She was convinced that it was Ida's personality, beauty, and everything that was sucking the attention away from her.
For goodness sake, Martha, she's my only child.
He would engage in fun activities only with Ida. Amateur photography, long walks in the city, and Martha wasn't invited.
While William and Ida are enjoying each other's company, Martha's only companions are loneliness and jealousy.
Where do you think you're going?
The seeds of hate just started to sprout deep down inside.
to the kinetoscope parlor with Edward.
Not until you finish your chores, you nut.
She took out her rage mostly on Ida.
We have maids for that. In fact, we have two.
When Martha would give her a basic order, clean your room, make your bed, or do what have you, and she would get a little bit of lip from her stepdaughter.
How dare you! Touch me again and I'll make sure you end up back on the street!
It just further fueled the rage.
She's lost her mind!
All that rage that she'd been holding, barely containing, comes out now.
When it comes to evil stepmothers, 48-year-old Martha Place could be in the running for poster girl. Her envy of 17-year-old stepdaughter, Ida, has ignited into physical violence.
William, please.
She would become physical. She might throw things, she might smash things.
Is this necessary? The neighbors.
And alienated her husband, William.
William was having none of this.
Will you be coming to the station to file charges, sir?
Well, I think it'll be good for her to spend a few nights in the slammer while I, have a think about it.
He didn't just throw her out, he had her arrested.
A few nights in a jail cell is a sobering experience.
Thank you for bringing the carriage for me, William.
Martha returns home, a reformed woman.
He invited her back into the house thinking that she'd overcome that rage.
I just want to say how sorry I am.
She promised to be good, she was contrite, and for a while, things were better.
She seemed to realize that if she wanted to stay in her good situation, she had to behave.
But there's been no magical transformation. It's the same Martha inside.
It was just bubbling under the surface, and it wouldn't take too long for that shell to crack and break away.
On February 7th, 1898, Martha's facade shatters when she finds her husband's will.
If William died, his house would not go to Martha. It would go to his daughter, Ida.
Drinking again, eh, Martha?
You put the house in her name.
That was the proverbial straw that broke Martha's back.
You've been going through my papers.
I'm your wife.
And Martha felt that she had again been overlooked for Ida.
The old Martha's been biding her time. And now she makes a roaring comeback.
This anger became explosive. After William left for work, Martha went to confront Ida.
Martha produced a container of carbolic acid.
Get out! I'm not finished getting dressed yet.
You just had to have the house as well, didn't you?
She threw it in her face.
Ida was everything that Martha wasn't, or had ever been, or would ever be. So she destroyed her. The first thing to go was her beautiful face.
You're not so pretty now, are you?
The two of them are grappling and fighting, and Martha was so filled with rage. Her strength had to have been immense.
First, Martha takes Ida's beauty, and then her life.
So Ida's dead on the bed. And Martha just stands there realizing that her husband's going to be home in a little while, and he's going to find the love of his life, the true love of his life, his daughter, dead at Martha's hands.
She could have left. She didn't. She waited all day long for William to come through the door.
He doesn't see Martha hiding in the shadows.
Martha comes at him and hits him right across the right temple.
Martha thinks she struck a fatal blow. But she's miscalculated. Miraculously, William is alive.
William, bloodied from the axe wounds, manages to make it out his front door where his neighbor notices him and is able to call the police.
Martha doesn't run and is happy to talk to the police when they arrive.
When the police asked Martha about the crime, she admitted to throwing acid at Ida. She said, yeah, I threw acid on her, but I didn't kill her. Really?
In 1898, Martha Place is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death.
Martha was the first woman executed in the electric chair in the United States. A sad ending to a sad and desperate life.
God help me.
William Place trusted Martha to care for his family. In the end, she destroyed it.
She ended up hating the two people that she was supposed to love.
This is a story about a beautiful princess and an evil stepmother. Right out of Aesop's fables.
Brothers and sisters.
I think he loved her a lot.
They can bond.
He had something to accomplish.
Or bicker.
Big, bad idea.
The simple things in life bring joy to 41-year-old Lindsay Gillette. His infectious grin is well known in his rural Australian community.
Wow, excellent work, Lindsay. Mine will grow this big. Yeah, sure.
He led a very simple life. He worked in a sheltered workshop during the day.
Hey, how's it going, Shane?
Yeah, good. How you doing?
Good, how's it going?
Really good, really good. He's always smiling.
Yeah, no, he's always...
He wasn't so impaired that he didn't have a happy personality.
I forgot.
Lindsay is happiest when his twin sister, Judith Senges, comes to visit.
Good, that's a good one, yeah?
She was involved in his care. She went to meetings about his care.
What's your favourite? Come on, let's go.
He loved seeing her.
The siblings have a tragedy in common. Both are victims of separate car accidents.
Oh, he's in heaven, remember?
Judith is in constant pain. Lindsay is left with permanent brain damage.
By the time he was 7, he was put into institutions.
For many years, Judith has been her twin's custodian.
I think he loved her a lot, and she took him out. And she was his only visitor. He didn't have anyone else.
Judith has access to Lindsay's trust fund, worth nearly $130,000, set up to support him through his life.
Finish up.
She would claim $500 to $1,000 a month from his account.
But as well as expenses, she is spending his money on something else.
She was addicted to playing the slot machines.
And using that money for herself.
Oh, come on, 2 scatters.
And she doesn't let her young children stand in her way.
She would drug her children and so that they would fall asleep and she could go out and play the slot machines.
Judith uses a powerful sedative called chloral hydrate.
Which is now banned. It's a knockout drug.
Okay, who wants hot chocolate? Oh, you take this one. It's got more chocolate in it.
Judy gave this medication to her 2 young children so she could go to the casino and play the slots.
There's one problem with her plan.
Come on.
Judith's losing. And her brother's trust fund is quickly shrinking.
Judy received notification one day from the Supreme Court that they were concerned about the trust fund.
Capital was being eroded, and it had to stop.
Hello? Yes, this is Judith Sengiz. I'm bringing back my brother's trust fund.
It was being depleted too quickly, so they put a halt to withdrawals.
Oh, yes, that's because I had to buy things for Lindsay. Oh, I don't know, I had to buy some clothes and furniture and what have you.
She was called in to explain.
Yes, that's fine. I'll come in. All right, thank you.
I'm guessing at that point, Judith panicked.
Caught with her hand in the cookie jar, Judith's extra income is cut off.
She always regarded Lindsay's money as her money.
Desperate times call for desperate measures.
He was just the one standing in the way of her getting her hands on the money.
May 10th, 1994.
Son?
To the outside world, a loving sister, Judith Senges, is taking her disabled twin out for the day.
Will we be lots of money?
Hope so. Right, sit still.
But she's planning something far more sinister. Her gambling habit is about to be exposed. And her money tap turned off.
Why are you so angry?
You wouldn't understand.
Unless she gets control of her brother's trust fund.
She saw salvation in that 100-something grand that was in the trust account.
But to get the fund in her name, she needs to inherit it.
Come on, go to lunch.
For Lindsay, it's the perfect day.
Then they went for lunch and Lindsay had a pie. She saw a woman down the shops and she said, "How are you, Lindsay?" And he said, "I'm having the best day of my whole life because I've gone out to lunch with my sister."
After a trip to the slots and lunch, Judith drops her brother near a golf course.
Pick up the kids.
Okay.
His favorite pastime is collecting golf balls.
I'm going to the golf course to find some balls.
Good.
He said he'd try and get her a pink golf ball for Sis.
But the next day, Judith gets a call from the police. Her brother has been found on the side of the road. The victim of a hit and run.
It was a really pitiful sight that someone who was so well loved could just be abandoned at the side of the road like that.
We are sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Lindsay had a tragic life.
Police are puzzled by Lindsay's injuries.
It was really clear to them that he had been run over by a car, but he hadn't been hit by a car.
The last person to see him alive is Judith. And when they check her vehicle, it is squeaky clean.
I do have just one more question. Why did you wash your car when you got home?
I always do that. So dusty up there.
She told police that she always washed her car after visiting Lindsay. All of her family members disagreed with that. They'd never seen her do that before.
Police are convinced there is foul play, and Judith is involved.
They had fibres that matched from the body to the bottom of the car. They had dyes that were the same. They had DNA. It was circumstantial, but it was sort of overwhelming circumstantial evidence.
On being a hit and then hit again and run.
And furthermore, drugs are found in Lindsay's system. The same drugs Judith uses to knock out her own children.
You look hot. You should have a drink.
She would have got trust and cooperation from Lindsay right up until it was too late, I suspect.
Investigators have proof Judith ran over her brother, but they can't prove that's what killed him.
They couldn't find a cause of death. And therefore, if there's no cause of death, you can't have a murder charge.
Her brother's dead, but Judith's charged with attempted murder.
Quite surprisingly, Judy got off rather lucky.
In 1996, Judith Senges is sentenced to 10 years and serves the minimum non-parole period of 6. She is released in 2002.
There's a special place in hell for people who prey on the elderly and the infirm. Judith's place is waiting.
For these deadly women, family feuds became fatal affairs. Jenny Pan wanted her inheritance more than her.
It begins with a sound that no one remembers clearly anymore, a sound that may never have existed at all, a door closing, a footstep in wet grass, the hum of a streetlight flickering above an empty road in rural Ohio. Because in the early hours of an October morning in 1991, something happened that would carve a permanent scar into a quiet community and then vanish into silence, leaving behind only questions, rumors, and a name spoken carefully, almost fearfully, for more than 3 decades. The town was the kind of place people stopped noticing, a stretch of low houses, diners with cracked vinyl booths, churches that filled on Sunday and emptied by noon, where everyone knew everyone else's routines and believed that familiarity was a form of safety. The victim fit neatly into that landscape, ordinary enough to disappear into it, young enough to be noticed, old enough to have a life already forming, a job, plans, a habit of taking the same route home every night. On paper, there was nothing remarkable about that evening. No reported threats. No public arguments. No sense of danger hanging in the air. And that, investigators would later say, was the first problem. Sometime after midnight, the routine broke. The victim never made it home. A car was found where it should not have been, angled slightly wrong, keys still inside, door ajar as if someone had stepped out intending to return seconds later. The engine was cold. The radio was silent. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no blood on the pavement, just a strange stillness that didn't belong there, like a sentence cut off before the final word. By sunrise, the town knew. By noon, the sheriff's office was flooded with calls. Friends swore they had seen the victim hours later, walking, talking, alive. A gas station clerk thought they remembered a familiar face at the counter, but couldn't be sure. Someone claimed they heard shouting near the river, another insisted it was just kids messing around. Each tip pulled the investigation in a different direction, and each led nowhere. The longer the hours stretched, the heavier the air became, until hope thinned into something fragile and dangerous. When the search intensified, the landscape itself seemed to resist giving answers. Fields were combed. Woods were walked line by line. Divers slipped into cold, dark water where visibility dropped to nothing. Helicopters circled, their blades chopping through the quiet, scattering birds and nerves alike. Nothing surfaced. No body. No weapon. No clear timeline. The absence became the loudest detail of all. Investigators leaned on what they had left, people. They questioned coworkers, friends, former partners, neighbors who claimed they'd been asleep, neighbors who claimed they'd heard something but hadn't looked out the window. Alibis blurred. Stories shifted slightly with each retelling. A name surfaced, then another, each one briefly glowing with suspicion before fading back into the crowd. The case file thickened, but the truth stayed thin, elusive, just out of reach. As days turned into weeks, the headlines changed. Search continues. Family pleads for information. Community on edge. Candlelight vigils filled the town square, faces lit from below, eyes searching one another for reassurance that no one could quite offer. Parents walked their children closer. Doors were locked earlier. Conversations lowered in volume whenever strangers passed by. Fear didn't explode here. It seeped in slowly, settling into routines, becoming part of them. Then came the first rumor that would refuse to die. Someone somewhere claimed to know what really happened. Someone who had talked too much after a few drinks. Someone who had hinted at a secret, a mistake, an accident gone wrong. Police followed the lead, questioned the source, traced the story back through a chain of whispers until it collapsed under its own weight. No proof. No corroboration. Just another echo fading into the archive. Months passed. Evidence degraded. Witnesses moved away. Memories softened at the edges. The case slipped quietly into a different category, one investigators never liked to say out loud but always recognized instantly. Cold case. The words carried a finality that no one wanted, a suggestion that whatever answers existed were already retreating into the past. But the town never let it go. The victim's face remained taped to bulletin boards, printed on flyers that yellowed with time. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Every new detective assigned to the file promised fresh eyes, a renewed push, and every time, the same wall rose up, impenetrable and indifferent. Files were reread. Interviews replayed. Old suspects were revisited, their lives now older, heavier, some marked by failures, others by quiet success. None broke. Technology advanced. DNA databases expanded. Cold cases across the country cracked open under the weight of science. Each breakthrough elsewhere reignited hope here, a belief that maybe, finally, this mystery would follow the same path. Evidence was retested. Items once thought useless were examined again under brighter lights. Results came back inconclusive. Or worse, definitive in their uselessness. Years later, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not publicly. A call came in late one night, routed through channels that no longer remembered the urgency they once carried. A voice on the other end referenced details that hadn't been released, small things, almost insignificant on their own, but unsettling in their accuracy. The caller didn't give a name, didn't ask for anything. Just spoke, slowly, deliberately, as if unburdening themselves of a weight they could no longer carry. Detectives listened. They took notes. They compared the information to the file. Some of it fit. Some of it didn't. The voice disappeared again, leaving behind a trail that led not to a crime scene, but to a person long considered peripheral, someone who had always been there, close enough to matter, distant enough to escape real scrutiny. When that person was finally brought in, decades after the night that started it all, they didn't look like a monster. They looked tired. Older. Smaller than memory had made them. The interview room light flattened every feature, every expression. Hours passed. Then more. And somewhere in the stretch between denial and silence, something changed. The confession, when it came, was quiet. No dramatic breakdown. No cinematic outburst. Just words, measured and careful, describing a version of events that explained enough to sound convincing, enough to close gaps that had plagued the case for years. An argument. A moment of panic. A decision made too fast to undo. The body, they said, was disposed of somewhere no one would ever think to look. For the first time in decades, the case moved. Press conferences were scheduled. Statements were drafted. The words "cold case closed" appeared in headlines that spread quickly, eagerly, across the state. Some felt relief. Others felt something closer to unease. Because even as the confession answered questions, it raised new ones. Details conflicted with known timelines. Certain claims couldn't be verified. The location given yielded nothing. Again. Still, the system turned as it always does. Charges were filed. The town exhaled, collectively, as if releasing a breath it had been holding since 1991. Justice, people said. Closure. An ending. But in quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the microphones packed away, detectives looked back at the file and felt the familiar chill. A confession without physical proof. A story told too late to challenge with certainty. Memory shaped by time, guilt, and the human need to explain the unexplainable. The road where it began still looks the same. The streetlight still hums. The grass still grows thick along the shoulder. And some nights, when the wind moves just right through the trees, the town remembers that before there was an ending, there was a disappearance, and before there was a confession, there was a mystery that refused to stay buried. The confession should have ended it, at least on paper, at least in the way people expect stories like this to end, but instead it reopened the past with a violence that surprised everyone, because once the words "cold case closed" were spoken aloud, the town was forced to look back at 1991 not as a distant blur, but as a living wound that had never truly healed. The name of the confessor spread faster than the facts, whispered first, then spoken openly, printed in bold letters that landed like a blow on kitchen tables and break-room counters. Some recognized it instantly. Others stared at it in disbelief, replaying old memories, trying to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the story now being told. The details released to the public were careful, measured, almost sterile. Investigators described a late-night confrontation, an argument that escalated, fear turning to violence in a matter of seconds. They spoke of panic, of a decision made under pressure, of a body hidden where nature and time would do the rest. But they did not explain how a crime committed in a town this small could leave behind so little, how a person could vanish without a trace, without a single confirmed witness, without evidence strong enough to stand on its own for more than 30 years. That gap, that silence between what was said and what was proven, became the new center of attention. Old witnesses came forward again, their voices heavier now, burdened by age and regret. Some claimed the confession matched what they had always suspected. Others said it made no sense at all. One woman remembered seeing the confessor that night, calm, unhurried, nothing like someone who had just committed an irreversible act. A former coworker insisted the timeline was wrong, that the accused couldn't have been in two places at once. These statements were logged, acknowledged, and quietly set aside, overshadowed by the power of a spoken admission. Families were divided. The victim's relatives spoke publicly of relief, of gratitude, of finally knowing who to blame after decades of uncertainty. But behind closed doors, even they struggled with the unanswered questions, the missing body, the lack of physical proof that might have given their grief a solid shape. Closure, they discovered, was not a moment. It was an ongoing negotiation with doubt. The accused family told a different story, one filled with shock and anger, with claims of coercion, of a man worn down by years of quiet suspicion, by interviews that never quite ended, by the weight of a town that had always looked at him sideways. They spoke of long interrogations, of leading questions, of a confession shaped as much by exhaustion as by truth. Their voices were often dismissed, framed as denial, as desperation, but they added another layer to a case already thick with uncertainty. Investigators defended their work, pointing to details only the perpetrator could have known, to inconsistencies resolved by the confession, to a narrative that finally made sense of the chaos left behind in 1991. Yet, even among law enforcement, privately, doubts lingered. A veteran detective admitted, off the record, that cold cases were dangerous things, that time did not just erode evidence, it reshaped memories, turning fragments into stories people believed because they needed to believe them. The location described in the confession was searched thoroughly, methodically, with technology unavailable in the early 90s. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the soil. Dogs traced patterns invisible to human eyes. Crews dug, sifted, waited. When nothing was found, officials cited environmental factors, changes in the landscape, the possibility that the remains had been moved. For some, that explanation was enough. For others, it was another crack in a foundation already showing signs of strain. As media attention intensified, so did the mythology around the case. Podcasts dissected every statement. Online forums mapped timelines down to the minute, overlaying old photographs with new satellite images, arguing endlessly over what mattered and what didn't. Amateur investigators found patterns professionals had missed or thought they had, reigniting speculation about alternative suspects long dismissed. Each theory pulled at the edges of the official story, threatening to unravel it entirely. The town watched itself reflected in these debates, its history reduced to talking points and sound bites. People who had lived there all their lives felt exposed, as if private memories were being examined under harsh lights. Some retreated from the conversation altogether. Others leaned into it, eager to finally say what they had been holding back since 1991. With each retelling, the past grew louder, more crowded, less certain. Court proceedings moved forward, slow and deliberate, constrained by the realities of prosecuting a decades-old crime. Evidence was challenged. The confession was analyzed word by word, tone by tone. Experts testified about false admissions, about the psychology of guilt and relief, about the ways pressure and time could distort truth. The defense painted a picture of a man confessing not to what he had done, but to what everyone expected him to have done. And through it all, one fact remained unchanged, stubborn and unsettling. The victim was still missing. No grave, no remains, no final proof that could anchor the story in something tangible. The absence that had defined the case from the beginning now haunted its supposed conclusion, casting a long shadow over every claim of certainty. Late at night, when the noise of public opinion faded, detectives revisited the file once more, tracing the path from that silent road in 1991 to this uneasy present. They asked themselves questions they could never answer out loud. Had they solved the mystery, or had they simply chosen the most convincing ending available? Had justice been served, or merely declared? In the town, life continued, but not unchanged. The case had left a residue, a sense that some truths, once disturbed, refused to settle back into place. People still slowed near the spot where the car had been found. Still lowered their voices when the victim's name came up. Still wondered, quietly, what really happened in the dark all those years ago, and whether the confession had brought light to the mystery, or merely shifted the shadows into new shapes. Time has a way of rearranging truth, and as the case pushed forward under the weight of its own history, the past began to bleed into the present in unexpected ways, dragging old secrets back to the surface like debris after a flood. The confession had given the town an answer, but it had also given permission for people to speak again, and when they did, it became clear that 1991 had never really been quiet. It had only been waiting. In private conversations, names resurfaced that had once flickered briefly in police notes before being crossed out and forgotten. A former friend who left town suddenly weeks after the disappearance. A volatile acquaintance known for late-night fights and sudden disappearances of his own. A stranger seen near the road that night, described vaguely, inconsistently, a shadow more than a person. Each name carried its own gravity, its own half-remembered stories, and each raised the same question no one wanted to say aloud. If the answer had been here all along, why had it taken so long to find it, and why did it still feel incomplete? The confession itself became an object of obsession. Analysts replayed the audio, parsing pauses, changes in tone, the rhythm of breathing between sentences. Some heard sincerity, a man finally unloading a burden he could no longer carry. Others heard uncertainty, careful phrasing shaped by suggestion, by years of exposure to the narrative investigators believed in. Every interpretation said as much about the listener as it did about the voice on the tape. Records from the early days of the investigation were scrutinized with a new intensity. Missed calls logged, but never followed up. Tips dismissed too quickly. A witness interview cut short because it didn't fit the emerging theory at the time. None of these oversights were dramatic on their own. Together, they formed a pattern of momentum, a case pushed forward by urgency and fear, then left to freeze when momentum ran out. In the early 90s, resources were limited and pressure was immense. The community wanted answers fast. Detectives worked long hours, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, convinced that if they just kept moving, the truth would reveal itself. When it didn't, exhaustion set in and certainty became a substitute for proof. That certainty hardened over time, shaping how every new piece of information was received, filtered, or ignored. As the trial approached, The absence of physical evidence loomed larger than ever. Prosecutors leaned heavily on the confession, framing it as the missing puzzle piece that made everything else fall into place. They spoke of consistency, of knowledge no innocent person could possess, of a narrative finally aligned. The defense responded by dismantling that narrative, pointing out contradictions, highlighting the lack of corroboration, reminding the court that words, no matter how compelling, were not the same as facts. Expert witnesses described the phenomenon of false confessions in unsettling detail. They explained how memory could be reshaped by repetition, how suggestion could feel like recollection, how people under prolonged stress might accept blame for events they did not commit simply to bring an end to uncertainty. These explanations hung in the air, technical yet deeply human, forcing everyone listening to confront the uncomfortable reality that certainty could be manufactured. Outside the courtroom, the town watched and waited, divided not by guilt or innocence, but by belief. Yard signs appeared, some calling for justice, others for caution. Old friendships strained under the pressure of disagreement. Conversations that once revolved around weather and work now circled back, again and again, to the same unresolved question. The case had stopped being about what happened in 1991 and had become a referendum on trust, on memory, on the reliability of the systems meant to protect truth. The victim's absence remained the most powerful presence of all. Photographs projected in court showed a frozen smile, a moment captured before everything unraveled. Family members listened as strangers debated the final hours of a life they still mourned daily. For them, every argument felt personal, every doubt a reopening of grief. They wanted the pain to have meaning, the loss to point to something concrete, something that could be named and held accountable. Investigators revisited the confession's timeline, comparing it against phone records, employment logs, weather reports, anything that could anchor the story to reality. Some elements aligned cleanly. Others resisted, floating just outside confirmation. The gaps were explained away as faulty memory, as the natural erosion of detail over decades. Whether those explanations were reasonable or convenient depended entirely on who was speaking. As weeks passed, the initial surge of attention faded, replaced by a slower, more unsettling realization. Even if the case ended in conviction, some part of it would remain unresolved. The missing body would still be missing. The final moments would still be imagined rather than known. The road where the car was found would still offer no answers, just asphalt and grass and the echo of an event no one witnessed clearly enough to describe. Late one evening, long after the courthouse had emptied, a detective sat alone with the file, flipping through pages worn thin by time. Notes scribbled in margins decades apart seemed to argue with each other, voices from different eras competing for authority. In that quiet, the detective acknowledged something rarely admitted publicly. That closure was often less about truth than about endurance, about deciding how much uncertainty a community could live with. The town continued its routines, but the case lingered, an undercurrent shaping how people moved through familiar spaces. Some nights, headlights slowed instinctively near the stretch of road where it began. Some mornings, people woke from dreams they couldn't quite remember, carrying a vague sense of unease into the day. The confession had promised an ending, but instead it had transformed the mystery, giving it a new shape, sharper and more complex than before. The past was no longer just unsolved. It was contested, debated, alive in ways it hadn't been for years. And beneath every argument, every headline, every carefully chosen word, the same question persisted, steady and unyielding, asking whether the truth had finally been spoken, or whether it was still out there, waiting, patient and silent, for someone to find it. As the legal machinery pressed forward, the past refused to stay in its assigned place, intruding again through details no one had paid much attention to the first time, details that now felt charged with new meaning. Old photographs were pulled from boxes and pinned up once more, examined not for what they showed, but for what they might be hiding at the edges, a figure half cut off by the frame, a car reflected faintly in a window, a timestamp that didn't quite line up with memory. Each image became a battlefield between what was known and what was merely assumed. The night itself was reconstructed again and again, mapped minute by minute until it resembled a script more than a memory. Investigators described the roads, the intersections, the distances between key points, arguing over what could realistically have happened in the narrow window of time they believed mattered most. Defense attorneys countered with alternative routes, alternative sequences, alternative explanations, each one plausible enough to unsettle the certainty the prosecution tried to project. The truth, buried under decades of retelling, seemed to shift depending on who was holding it. A former deputy, retired now and long removed from the spotlight, broke his silence in a rare interview, his voice steady but cautious. He spoke of the early days of the investigation, of pressure from above, from media, from a frightened town demanding reassurance. He admitted mistakes without naming them outright, choices made quickly that later became impossible to undo. His words didn't accuse anyone directly, but they hinted at a process driven as much by fear as by facts, a process that might have set the course for everything that followed. The confession remained the centerpiece, the gravitational force around which every argument orbited. Prosecutors emphasized its specificity, the way it accounted for small, unsettling details that had never been released publicly. The defense pointed out that those details had circulated informally for years, passed along in rumors, discussed in bars and backyards, absorbed unconsciously by anyone who lived close enough to the case to feel its weight. Knowledge, they argued, was not the same as guilt. Psychologists took the stand, explaining how memory could be rewritten without the person ever realizing it, how repetition could transform speculation into certainty. They described the slow erosion of self-trust, the way a person might eventually accept responsibility for a narrative they had heard often enough, especially when it offered an explanation for years of suspicion and isolation. These explanations were clinical, methodical, but their implications were deeply unsettling, suggesting that even the most confident admission could be built on unstable ground. The jury listened, faces carefully neutral, absorbing stories that stretched across decades, stories that asked them to judge not just an event, but time itself. They were asked to decide whether the gaps in evidence were reasonable, whether the absence of a body could be explained away, whether a confession alone could outweigh the lingering doubts that clung to the case like fog. Every pause in testimony felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions no one could answer definitively. Outside the courthouse, the town's relationship with the case continued to evolve. For some, the proceedings brought validation, a sense that long-held suspicions were finally being acknowledged. For others, it stirred anger, a belief that the wrong person was being sacrificed to close a file that had become an embarrassment, a symbol of failure no one wanted to own. The divide wasn't clean. It cut through families, friendships, workplaces, turning casual conversations into careful negotiations. New information surfaced unexpectedly, not in court, but in private, passed quietly to journalists and independent researchers. A tip that had never been followed up. A witness who had recanted and then been ignored. A piece of physical evidence logged incorrectly and effectively lost. None of these revelations were explosive on their own, but together they suggested a pattern of neglect that challenged the official narrative of a thorough, relentless investigation. The media seized on these cracks, reframing the story once again. Headlines shifted from certainty to skepticism, from closure to controversy. The phrase "cold case closed" began to appear alongside words like disputed, questioned, and under scrutiny. For a community desperate for an ending, this renewed uncertainty felt like a betrayal, a reopening of wounds that had barely begun to scar over. The victim's family found themselves caught in the middle, their grief amplified by the public debate. They were asked to comment on legal arguments, on expert testimony, on theories that treated their loss as an intellectual puzzle. Some days they clung to the confession as a lifeline, a way to give shape to decades of waiting. Other days they recoiled from it, unsettled by the growing sense that the truth might still be slipping through their fingers. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the question of motive grew louder. Prosecutors suggested fear, rage, a desperate attempt to silence a confrontation that threatened to spiral out of control. The defense argued that the motive was retrofitted, constructed after the fact to make the story feel complete. Without a body, without forensic confirmation, motive became another fragile piece of the puzzle, held together by inference rather than proof. In quiet moments, away from the cameras and the arguments, some investigators admitted to feeling trapped by the case. Solving it had been a career goal, an obsession, a measure of success. Now that a solution was on the table, however imperfect, letting go of it felt impossible, even if doubts lingered. The alternative, acknowledging that the mystery might remain unsolved forever, was too heavy to carry. The road where it all began remained unchanged, a mundane strip of asphalt bearing the weight of extraordinary speculation. Drivers passed without slowing, unaware or unwilling to engage with the history embedded there. And yet, for those who knew, the place still radiated unease, a reminder that some moments fracture time, leaving behind spaces that never quite return to normal. As closing arguments loomed, the town braced itself once more, preparing for a verdict that promised resolution but threatened to deepen division. Whatever the outcome, it was clear that the case had already rewritten itself, evolving from a disappearance into a confession, from a confession into a controversy, from a controversy into a mirror reflecting the limits of memory, justice, and certainty. The mystery had changed form again, shedding one skin only to reveal another beneath it, and in that transformation lay the most unsettling realization of all, that even after decades of searching, even after words spoken under oath, the truth might still be incomplete, fractured, waiting in the spaces between what was proven and what was merely believed. The courtroom held its breath as the case entered its most fragile phase. The moment when arguments hardened into positions and uncertainty was forced into the narrow confines of yes or no. By now, the story had been told so many times it felt almost mythic, but beneath the repetition, the rawness remained, sharp and unresolved. Every sentence spoken carried the weight of 30 years, every pause echoing with the possibility that the truth had already slipped past unnoticed. Closing arguments did not bring clarity so much as they brought contrast. The prosecution painted a picture of inevitability, a crime that could no longer hide behind the erosion of time, a confession that finally aligned scattered fragments into a single, coherent narrative. They spoke of courage, of accountability, of a man stepping forward at last to confront what he had done. Their words were steady, confident, designed to reassure a jury and a town desperate for an ending. The defense answered with doubt, not loud or theatrical, but methodical and persistent. They reminded the court of what was missing, not just the body, but the certainty that should accompany a conviction of this magnitude. They pointed again to the confession's inconsistencies, to the absence of corroborating evidence, to the psychological forces that could shape a false admission over decades of quiet pressure. Their argument did not ask the jury to believe in innocence. It asked them to acknowledge uncertainty. Outside, the town waited, suspended between relief and fear. News vans lined the streets. Reporters rehearsed phrases that could pivot instantly depending on the verdict. In diners and living rooms, people argued softly, cautiously, as if raising their voices might somehow influence what was happening behind those courthouse walls. The case had become a shared anxiety, a collective tension no one could escape. When deliberations began, time seemed to slow. Hours stretched into days, each one filled with speculation. A single question from the jury sent ripples through the courtroom, interpreted endlessly by analysts and observers. Did it signal doubt? Curiosity? A leaning one way or the other? No one knew, and that not knowing felt eerily familiar, returned to the long years when uncertainty was the only constant. Behind the scenes, investigators revisited old instincts, replaying decisions made decades earlier. Some felt vindicated, convinced that perseverance had finally paid off. Others felt an uncomfortable pull of regret, wondering whether the case had been shaped more by necessity than by truth. The confession had given them something solid to hold on to, but it had also exposed the fragility of everything built around it. The victim's family lived those days in a state of emotional suspension, moving between hope and dread with exhausting speed. They imagined what life might look like after a verdict, whether it would bring peace or simply a new version of pain. For years, they had learned to live without answers. Now they faced the possibility of answers that might not fully satisfy. As deliberations continued, new voices entered the public conversation. Former jurors from unrelated cases, legal scholars, psychologists, all weighing in on what it meant to decide guilt so long after the fact. They spoke of justice delayed, of the moral responsibility of certainty, of the danger in mistaking resolution for truth. Their commentary filled the airwaves, adding yet another layer to a case already heavy with interpretation. Late one night, a juror sat awake, staring at notes scribbled hastily during testimony, trying to reconcile emotion with instruction. The law demanded a verdict beyond reasonable doubt, but reason itself felt compromised by time, by memory, by the absence at the heart of the case. The juror thought of the victim, of the family, of the accused, all bound together by an event no one could fully reconstruct. The responsibility felt immense, almost unbearable. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom filled slowly, deliberately, as if everyone sensed the gravity of what was about to happen. The accused sat still, expression unreadable. The victim's family clutched each other, bracing for impact. The judge called the room to order, the words formal, practiced, unable to mask the tension vibrating beneath them. The verdict, when it was read, did not land cleanly. It rippled outward, triggering reactions that defied simple categorization. Relief and anger, vindication and doubt, all collided in the same space. Some felt justice had been served at last. Others felt a line had been crossed, a decision made too late, on too little. The town absorbed the moment in stunned silence before erupting into competing narratives almost immediately. Headlines followed, sharp and declarative, framing the outcome as an ending, a resolution to a mystery that had haunted Ohio since 1991. But beneath the bold type, questions lingered, stubborn and unresolved. The body was still missing. Key details remained unverified. The confession, now validated by a verdict, was no more complete than it had been before. In the days that followed, life resumed its routines, but with a new undercurrent of unease. Some people slept easier, believing the past had finally been laid to rest. Others found themselves more restless than ever, replaying arguments, testimony, and moments of doubt late into the night. The verdict had closed a chapter, but it had not silenced the story. The road remained. The silence of that October night remained. And in the space between what the court had decided and what the evidence could truly prove, the case lingered, transformed yet again, no longer just a mystery of disappearance, but a meditation on how justice is constructed, how truth is negotiated, and how, even when a verdict is spoken, uncertainty can survive, intact and insistent, refusing to fade. The verdict was supposed to quiet everything, to draw a hard line between before and after, but instead it shifted the noise into a lower, more persistent frequency, the kind that follows you even when the room is silent. In the weeks that followed, the town moved forward on the surface, schedules resumed, conversations drifted back to safer topics, yet beneath it all, the case continued to pulse, an unresolved rhythm that refused to fade. The sentence was handed down with the weight of ceremony, years measured out in numbers that sounded definitive, but felt strangely abstract against the scale of what had been lost. Cameras captured the moment, the gavel, the formal language of consequence. Some called it accountability. Others called it convenience. The accused was led away, older now, carrying a past that had finally caught up, or perhaps had been forced into a shape it never truly fit. Appeals followed, as they always do in cases like this, slow and technical, unfolding largely outside public view. Legal briefs replaced headlines. Arguments shifted from emotion to procedure, from guilt to process. The defense challenged the admissibility of the confession. the methods used to obtain it, the absence of corroborating evidence. Each filing reopened debates thought to be settled, reminding everyone that a verdict was not the same as certainty. Independent investigators took renewed interest, drawn by the combination of a cold case, a late confession, and a community still divided. They requested records, filed Freedom of Information requests, interviewed anyone willing to talk. What they found was not a single smoking gun, but a landscape of small inconsistencies, decisions made under pressure, moments where alternative paths had been closed too quickly. None of it proved innocence or guilt outright. All of it complicated the story. One former witness, now living far from Ohio, agreed to speak publicly for the first time. Their memory of that night had always felt out of place, they said, a detail that never quite fit the official timeline. Back in 1991, they had tried to explain it, but the investigation had already moved on. Decades later, they wondered whether speaking sooner might have changed everything, or whether the system had been too invested in its chosen direction to listen. The victim's family navigated this new phase with quiet endurance. The verdict had given them something tangible, a legal acknowledgement of responsibility, but it had not delivered the peace they had imagined. Without remains to bury, without a final understanding of what had happened, their grief remained suspended, unresolved. They attended hearings, read filings, lived inside a process that felt endless, their lives still orbiting a night-long past. Media coverage became more analytical, less urgent but more persistent. Long-form articles dissected the investigation from start to finish, highlighting missed opportunities and unanswered questions. Some pieces framed the case as a triumph of perseverance. Others cast it as a cautionary tale about the limits of memory and the dangers of closing cold cases without physical proof. Each article reignited discussion, drawing the town back into a conversation it could not escape. Psychologists and legal experts continued to weigh in, using the case as an example in broader debates about justice delayed and the reliability of confessions. They spoke of the human need for narrative, for endings that make sense, and the institutional pressures that favor resolution over ambiguity. Their analyses did not accuse individuals so much as they questioned systems, suggesting that the truth could be distorted not by malice, but by momentum. Years passed in this uneasy equilibrium, the case technically resolved yet emotionally alive. Anniversaries came and went, marked by quieter remembrances now, fewer public gatherings, but no less intensity. Each passing year made the possibility of discovering the victims' remains more remote, yet the hope never fully disappeared. Somewhere, people believed, the ground still held an answer. Occasionally, tips still arrived, fragments of information sparked by memory, guilt, or the desire to be part of a story that refused to end. Most led nowhere. A few prompted brief searches, shallow digs that yielded nothing but disturbed soil and renewed frustration. Each failure reinforced the central absence, the missing piece around which everything else revolved. For investigators who had worked the case early in their careers, retirement brought no relief from its grip. Some admitted privately that they still dreamed about it, replaying interviews, reconsidering suspects, imagining alternate outcomes. Solving a case was supposed to bring closure. Instead, this one had followed them, a reminder that not all questions submit to answers. The road where the car had been found remained unmarked, unmemorialized, indistinguishable from any other stretch of pavement. Yet for those who knew its history, it had become a symbol of unfinished business, a physical place that embodied the gap between what was declared and what was known. Passing it felt like crossing a boundary between official truth and personal doubt. The case had evolved again, no longer just a cold case or a conviction, but a touchstone in a larger conversation about justice itself. It forced people to confront uncomfortable possibilities, that the system could be both earnest and flawed, that certainty could coexist with error, that endings could be proclaimed without being complete. And so the story continued, quieter now, less visible, but no less powerful, carried forward by those who refused to let it settle into a single, simple explanation. The verdict had closed a file, but it had not closed the mystery. It had only transformed it, embedding it deeper into the town's collective memory, where it would linger, unresolved in spirit if not in law, waiting for something or someone to finally tip the balance between belief and truth. Years after the verdict, the case drifted into a strange afterlife, no longer dominating headlines yet never fully disappearing, resurfacing in quiet ways that reminded the town the past was still watching. It appeared in classroom discussions at the local college, in legal seminars dissecting old prosecutions, in late-night conversations when someone would suddenly ask, almost involuntarily, whether they truly believed the right person had been convicted. The question lingered unanswered, a reflex more than a challenge. The appeals process ground on, measured in paperwork and patience rather than passion. Each denial was brief, procedural, offering little commentary, little reassurance. The higher courts did not weigh in on what might have happened in 1991. They focused on whether the trial had followed the rules, whether the confession met legal standards, whether the jury had been instructed correctly. In that narrow frame, the case appeared clean enough. Outside it, doubts continued to breathe. The convicted man aged behind bars, his story fixed in transcripts and rulings, yet constantly reinterpreted by those who followed the case. Some saw his silence as acceptance, a final surrender to the consequences of long-hidden guilt. Others saw it as resignation, the exhaustion of someone who had spoken once and paid dearly for it, learning that words, once released, could not be taken back. Every photograph, every brief mention of his name, reignited arguments about what silence really meant. The victim's memory, meanwhile, took on a different quality, less defined by the crime and more by absence. Friends who had grown older spoke of what might have been, the milestones never reached, the ordinary life that had been stolen without explanation. Memorials were small and personal now, quiet gestures rather than public events. The pain had not faded. It had simply learned to exist without spectacle. Independent researchers continued to probe, driven by a sense that something important remained just out of reach. They charted timelines with obsessive precision, compared early police statements against later ones, highlighted discrepancies that suggested alternative interpretations. None of their work overturned the conviction, but it kept the case alive in public consciousness, a reminder that truth was not always synonymous with legality. One retired investigator, long removed from official duties, finally allowed himself to speak candidly. He admitted that the case had shaped his understanding of justice more than any other, teaching him that resolution was often a compromise between what could be proven and what could be lived with. He did not claim the verdict was wrong. He simply acknowledged that it might not be complete. In his voice, there was no anger, only a quiet weariness born of decades spent chasing certainty. As technology advanced, the possibility of new evidence remained tantalizing yet remote. DNA databases grew exponentially, but without remains or preserved biological material, their power was limited. Advances in geolocation, data analysis, and forensic modeling could reconstruct patterns, but they could not replace what had never been collected. The case became a lesson in how much justice depends on timing, on the tools available at the moment a crime occurs. Occasionally, a story would circulate about a chance discovery, a bone found during construction, a tip about a hidden grave, and hope would flicker briefly before being extinguished by routine testing. Each false alarm reopened wounds, reminding everyone how fragile the promise of answers had become. The town learned to approach such news with cautious detachment, balancing hope against the fatigue of disappointment. For younger residents, the case was history, a story they had grown up hearing but never experienced firsthand. Yet even for them, it carried a peculiar weight, a sense that their community was defined in part by something unresolved. They inherited the unease without the memories, a second-hand legacy of doubt that shaped how they understood safety, trust, and authority. The road, unchanged, continued to absorb its share of passing glances, though fewer now, as time thinned the number of people who remembered its significance. Still, on certain nights, When fog settled low and headlights cut through it unevenly, the place seemed to echo with questions, as if the landscape itself refused to forget what had happened there, or what had not been found. The case had become a kind of mirror, reflecting different truths to different people, shaped by belief, experience, and the stories they chose to trust. It no longer demanded answers in the way it once had. Instead, it posed a quieter, more unsettling challenge: how to live with ambiguity, how to honor loss without certainty, how to accept that some mysteries do not end so much as they evolve. And so it endured, carried forward not by official action, but by memory, conversation, and the persistent human need to revisit the past in search of meaning. The cold case had been closed by the law, but in the minds of those it touched, it remained open, a question mark etched into the history of the town, waiting, patiently, for a truth that might never fully reveal itself. The longer the years stretched on, the more the case seemed to dissolve into something less tangible than facts and rulings, becoming instead a presence, a background noise that never quite went silent. It surfaced in unexpected moments, in offhand remarks, in the way certain names still caused a pause in conversation, as if people were instinctively measuring their words against a history that refused to stay buried. Even those who claimed they were done with it felt its pull, a reminder that some stories do not release their hold just because time has moved on. In private, doubts hardened into convictions for some, while certainty softened into questions for others. People who had once defended the verdict began to admit, quietly, that the missing body troubled them more than they had allowed themselves to say. Those who had always been skeptical found their skepticism evolving, no longer sharp or angry, but resigned, shaped by the realization that proving an alternative truth was nearly impossible. The arguments lost their heat, but not their weight. Occasionally, new information would ripple through the community, not enough to reopen the case officially, but enough to disturb its settled surface. A box of old notes discovered during an estate cleanout. An interview transcript misfiled and forgotten. A memory triggered by an unrelated event, suddenly vivid after decades of dormancy. Each fragment was examined, discussed, debated, then folded back into the larger narrative without changing its overall shape. The truth, whatever it was, remained elusive, just beyond the reach of confirmation. The victim's name continued to appear in unexpected places, referenced in discussions about cold cases, about justice delayed, about the psychological toll of unresolved loss. For some, the name had become symbolic, shorthand for everything that could go wrong when a crime outlived the clarity of its own moment. For others, it remained deeply personal, a reminder of a life interrupted, a future erased without explanation. Both meanings coexisted uneasily, bound together by the same unanswered questions. In legal circles, the case was cited as an example of how the system grapples with time, how standards designed for fresh evidence strain under the weight of decades. Professors dissected the confession, students argued its validity, scholars published cautious analyses that avoided conclusions while circling the same central uncertainty. The case offered no clean lessons, only complexities, a reminder that justice was often an imperfect negotiation between ideals and limitations. The convicted man became increasingly distant from the public imagination, his story reduced to brief mentions in articles and footnotes. Yet his presence lingered in the case's unresolved aspects, a constant reminder that someone was paying a price for an ending many still questioned. Whether that price represented accountability or error depended on who was asked, and the answer rarely came without hesitation. Meanwhile, the physical world showed little interest in resolution. The land changed slowly, subtly, new growth obscuring old paths, construction altering familiar landmarks. Places once searched thoroughly were reshaped by time, making the idea of finding anything there now seem almost absurd. Nature had done what it always does, erasing traces, reclaiming space, indifferent to human urgency. For those who had searched in the early days, this transformation was particularly difficult to accept. They remembered the ground as it once was, open and exposed, full of possibility. Seeing it now, altered beyond recognition, reinforced the sense that opportunities had been lost, that timing had been everything, and that whatever answers the Earth once held might be gone forever. The community learned to live alongside this ambiguity, integrating it into their understanding of themselves. It became part of local identity, a story told carefully, with caveats and pauses, acknowledging both the official conclusion and the lingering unease beneath it. The case was no longer a scandal or a mystery in the traditional sense. It was a shadow, subtle but persistent, shaping perceptions in ways few could articulate clearly. Late at night, when streets emptied and familiar routines fell away, the questions seemed louder. People lay awake, replaying fragments of the story, imagining alternative scenarios, wondering how small decisions might have altered everything. These private reckonings rarely led to answers. They led instead to a deeper awareness of uncertainty, a recognition that some truths resist containment. The case had long since passed the point of resolution as an event. It had become a process, an ongoing negotiation between memory, belief, and doubt. Each generation that encountered it brought new perspectives, new assumptions, reshaping its meaning without resolving its core. The disappearance, the confession, the verdict, all existed simultaneously, layered rather than sequential, defying the idea of a single, definitive narrative. And so the story endured, not as a closed chapter, but as a living question, woven into the fabric of the town and the lives it touched. The cold case had been declared finished, but its influence remained active, a quiet force reminding everyone that some mysteries do not end when the law says they should, but continue on, unresolved in spirit, asking to be remembered even when they can no longer be answered. With each passing year, the case receded further from the immediacy of lived memory and settled into something closer to legend, not in the sense of exaggeration, but in the way it was told and retold, shaped by the needs of the moment rather than the precision of fact. New residents learned of it through fragments, a mention in a local paper, a story shared cautiously by someone who had been there when it happened. The details blurred, but the unease remained intact, preserved like an undercurrent beneath ordinary life. The town's relationship with the case became quieter, more reflective. Where there had once been arguments, there were now sighs, long pauses, and acceptance that certainty might never come. People spoke less about what happened and more about how it felt to live through it, the long years of not knowing, the strange relief and discomfort of an ending that never quite convinced. The emotional truth, it seemed, had outlasted the factual one. Occasionally, the case flared back into public awareness, sparked by anniversaries or by developments elsewhere, other cold cases solved or overturned. Each time, comparisons were made, hopes briefly raised, then gently set aside. The conditions that allowed those breakthroughs did not exist here, not anymore. Time had taken too much with it, leaving behind a story that could be examined endlessly but never fully resolved. For those who had grown up in the shadow of the disappearance, the case influenced how they understood risk and trust. It taught them that danger did not always announce itself, that familiarity could be deceptive, that answers could take decades to surface and still feel incomplete. These lessons were absorbed quietly, passed down not as warnings, but as sensibilities, shaping the way people moved through the world. The victim's memory persisted in subtle ways, in scholarships named quietly, in community projects dedicated without explanation, in moments of silence observed by those who knew. These gestures did not demand attention. They simply acknowledged loss, offering a form of remembrance that did not rely on certainty. In doing so, they provided something the legal process could not, a space to grieve without answers. The convicted man's absence from public life became total, his story frozen at the moment of judgment. Appeals exhausted, options narrowed, he existed largely as a symbol rather than a person, representing for some the triumph of accountability, for others the risk of irreversible error. Over time, even this symbolic role faded, replaced by a broader contemplation of what justice meant in cases that outlived their evidence. Scholars continued to reference the case, not for its specifics, but for the questions it raised. How should courts weigh confessions when time has eroded context? What responsibility does a system have to acknowledge uncertainty? Can closure be ethical if it rests on unresolved doubt? These discussions kept the case alive in abstract form, removed from the human cost that had defined it for so long. The physical spaces tied to the story became increasingly ordinary. The road blended seamlessly into the landscape, unmarked and unremarkable. The places searched so intensely in the early days were indistinguishable from anywhere else. To an outsider, there was nothing to suggest that anything significant had ever happened there. To those who knew, this ordinariness was part of the unease, a reminder of how easily profound events could disappear into the everyday. Memory itself began to shift. First-hand witnesses aged, their recollections softening, details merging, emotional truths outlasting specifics. As these voices faded, the story relied more on records, on transcripts, on interpretations built atop interpretations. The case moved further away from lived experience and closer to narrative, shaped by whoever told it next. Yet, even as it drifted into this quieter phase, the case retained a strange vitality. It continued to provoke reflection, to unsettle assumptions, to resist simple categorization. It was no longer just about a disappearance in 1991 or a confession decades later. It had become a lens through which people examined their beliefs about certainty, memory, and the passage of time. In the end, what endured was not an answer, but a question, carried forward by those who remembered and those who inherited the story secondhand. The cold case had been closed by declaration, reinforced by verdict, and yet it remained open in the only place that truly mattered, in the collective consciousness of a community that had learned, slowly and painfully, that some mysteries do not end. They simply change shape, lingering as reminders of how fragile truth can be when measured against time. By the time the case reached its 10th year beyond the verdict, it had lost any sharp edges it once had, settling instead into something heavier, more diffuse, a presence felt rather than confronted. It lived in the background of the town's identity, shaping reactions to new crimes, new investigations, new promises of certainty. Whenever sirens cut through the night or police tape appeared on a quiet street, the memory stirred, uninvited, reminding people how easily a single moment could fracture decades. Law enforcement spoke of the case less frequently now, but when they did, their words were careful, almost cautious. Officially, it was resolved. Unofficially, it had become a reference point, a reminder of the cost of time and the limits of persistence. Younger officers studied it in training, not as a triumph or a failure, but as a warning, a demonstration of how quickly evidence could vanish and how slowly doubt could grow. The victim's family moved through life with a practiced grace born of necessity. They had learned how to answer questions without answering them, how to acknowledge the verdict without embracing it fully. Their grief no longer demanded resolution. It existed as a constant companion, shaped by years of unanswered questions and the knowledge that certainty, even if it arrived now, would come too late to change what mattered most. In private moments, they sometimes wondered what the truth would feel like if it ever emerged clearly. Would it bring relief or simply confirm what time had already taught them, that some losses are too deep to be healed by explanation alone? These thoughts remained unspoken, shared only in the quiet spaces where public narratives could not intrude. The case continued to surface in unexpected places, referenced in documentaries, cited in discussions about reform, invoked whenever debates turned to the reliability of confessions or the ethics of reopening cold cases. Each mention stripped it further from its origins, turning it into an example, a cautionary tale abstracted from the human lives at its center. In this form, it traveled far beyond Ohio, influencing conversations among people who had never seen the road, never known the names involved, yet felt the weight of the questions it raised. Those who had worked the case from the beginning carried it with them into retirement, into quieter lives where memories had more room to roam. Some found themselves replaying decisions late at night, imagining alternative paths, wondering whether a different choice at a different moment might have led to a clearer ending. Others resisted such thoughts, choosing instead to believe that they had done the best they could with what they had. Both responses coexisted, unresolved, much like the case itself. The physical absence at the center of the story never softened. No remains were found. No definitive proof emerged to anchor the confession beyond words. This absence became the case's most enduring feature, a void that resisted every attempt to fill it. Over time, it took on a symbolic quality, representing not just one missing person, but the broader human struggle to impose order on chaos. Community conversations about the case grew more philosophical, less focused on blame and more on meaning. People asked what justice truly required, whether it demanded certainty or merely accountability, whether an imperfect answer was better than none at all. These discussions rarely reached conclusions. They existed as ongoing reflections, shaped by personal experience and belief rather than evidence. The younger generation listened to these conversations with a mix of curiosity and detachment. For them, the case was history, something that had happened before they were born, yet its influence was undeniable. It had shaped policies, attitudes, and a collective wariness that lingered in how the town responded to uncertainty. They inherited not the trauma itself, but its imprint, a subtle caution woven into everyday life. As the years continued to pass, the case receded further into the realm of memory, no longer demanding attention, but refusing to disappear entirely. It remained a touchstone, invoked whenever discussions turned to truth, time, and the fragile nature of certainty. It was a reminder that some stories resist closure not because answers are impossible, but because the answers, when they come, are never complete. In this way, the case endured, not as a solved mystery or an unsolved one, but as something in between, a space where belief and doubt coexisted uneasily. The confession had closed a chapter, the verdict had sealed it, yet the story itself remained open-ended, lingering in the collective mind of a community that had learned, through decades of waiting and wondering, that the absence of certainty could be as powerful and as haunting as any answer. The story does not end with a discovery, or a revelation buried beneath years of soil, or a sudden reversal that rewrites everything people thought they knew. It ends the way some stories do in the real world, quietly, unevenly, without resolution, fading not into silence, but into a low, persistent hum that never fully disappears. The case settles into history, but history does not close around it. It leaves a gap. Long after the courtrooms emptied and the headlines moved on, the town continued to live beside the absence that had defined it for so long. New houses were built. Old businesses closed. Children grew up unaware of the fear that once clung to these streets, yet still shaped them in ways no one could quite explain. The name of the victim was spoken less often now, but when it was, voices still softened, as if acknowledging something fragile and unfinished. The official record remained unchanged. The confession stood. The verdict stood. The file stayed closed. On paper, the mystery was over. But paper had never held the weight of this case. The weight lived in memory, in doubt, in the unanswered question that surfaced in quiet moments when the world slowed enough for reflection. It lived in the fact that no one could point to a place and say, "This is where it ends." For the victim's family, time did not deliver clarity, only endurance. They learned how to carry grief without a body to mourn, how to accept an ending that felt more procedural than true. Their lives moved forward because they had to, not because the past had released them. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that closure was not a destination, but a compromise, a way of surviving uncertainty rather than defeating it. The convicted man faded further into the background, his story frozen at the moment of judgment, his voice absent from the narrative that continued without him. Whether he carried truth or error with him into silence remained unknowable. His existence became another unanswered question, folded into the larger one, another reminder that the justice system could declare conclusions without delivering certainty. Those who had worked the case carried it quietly, like a scar that no longer hurt but never vanished. They rarely spoke of it, but it informed how they approached every investigation that followed. They knew now how fragile early moments were, how easily paths could narrow, how time could turn conviction into confusion. The case had taught them something no training ever could, that solving a mystery and understanding it were not always the same thing. The road where it began remained unchanged, ordinary in every visible way. Cars passed over it daily, tires humming against asphalt, unaware of the history pressed beneath them. There was no marker, no sign, nothing to indicate that this place had once been the center of a community's fear and hope. And yet, for those who remembered, it still felt charged, as if the ground itself retained the echo of an unanswered question. As years folded into decades, the case transformed again, no longer a legal matter, no longer even a debate, but a caution whispered through time. It reminded people that certainty was fragile, that truth could fracture, that some mysteries resisted every attempt to contain them. It existed as proof that not all endings were clean, and not all answers brought peace. The cold case had been closed by law, reinforced by confession, sealed by verdict. But closure, it turned out, was not a switch that could be flipped. It was a word people used when they needed to move on, even if something inside them refused. The mystery endured, not in evidence or testimony, but in the collective consciousness of those who lived with it, inherited it, and carried it forward without realizing they were doing so. And so the story remains, suspended between belief and doubt, between what was said and what was never found. A disappearance in 1991. A confession decades later. A truth declared, but never fully proven. In the end, what lingers is not the answer, but the silence around it, the space where certainty should have been, and the unsettling realization that some questions do not fade with time, they simply wait, patient and unresolved, for someone to listen closely enough to hear what was never spoken. The silence that follows an ending like this is not empty. It is crowded. It presses in slowly, filling every space the answers were supposed to occupy. After the case was declared closed, after the last microphone was turned off and the final document was signed, the quiet that settled over the town was heavier than the noise that had come before. It was the quiet of something unresolved, the kind that makes people lower their voices without knowing why, the kind that lingers long after everyone insists it is time to move on. Years passed, but the story did not age the way other stories do. It did not soften at the edges or fade into folklore. It stayed sharp, embedded in the background of daily life. People who had not yet been born in 1991 grew up hearing fragments of it, half-sentences exchanged at kitchen tables, pauses that fell whenever the conversation drifted too close. They learned early that some questions were not meant to be asked out loud, not because they were forbidden, but because no one had learned how to answer them. The files remained archived, boxed and labeled, stored in climate-controlled rooms where time was meant to stop. Evidence bags lay untouched, their contents preserved but inert, like relics from a past that refused to speak. Advances in technology came and went, each one sparking a brief flare of hope that quickly dimmed when nothing new emerged. DNA databases expanded. Forensic tools grew sharper. But absence, once set in motion, proved difficult to reverse. You cannot test what was never found. Every so often, someone would revisit the case. A journalist chasing a thread. A podcaster looking for a shadowed corner of history. A detective nearing retirement, wondering if there was something they had missed. Each return followed the same path, tracing familiar lines, circling the same gaps, stopping at the same dead ends. And each time, the conclusion was identical. There was nothing new to add, only old questions rearranged into new shapes. The confession, once so definitive on paper, continued to age poorly under scrutiny. Its words were static, frozen in time, unable to adapt to the doubts that grew around them. People read it again and again, searching for clarity, for certainty, for the moment where everything snapped into place. Instead, they found ambiguity. Details that aligned too neatly. Omissions that felt deliberate. A narrative that explained enough to satisfy the system, but not enough to silence suspicion. For the family, memory became a form of resistance. They remembered not just the loss, but the person behind it, the routines, the habits, the life interrupted without explanation. In their recollections, the victim was not a case number or a headline, but a presence that refused to be reduced to mystery alone. They marked anniversaries privately, not because the world still noticed, but because forgetting felt like a second disappearance. The town itself changed, but slowly, carefully, as if wary of disturbing something buried beneath its foundations. New residents arrived with no connection to the past, drawn by affordability, by quiet streets, by the promise of anonymity. They sensed something in the air, though, an undercurrent they could not name. Some learned the story eventually. Others never did. But all of them lived within its radius, shaped by decisions made long before they arrived. Law enforcement moved on, but not entirely. The case surfaced occasionally in training rooms, cited as an example, dissected not for its resolution but for its complications. It became a lesson in how certainty could be manufactured, how pressure and time could conspire to create answers that felt complete without being whole. Younger officers listened, taking notes, unaware that one day they too would carry cases that refused to stay behind. The road remained. The night remained. The year 1991 remained fixed in the collective imagination, not as a point in time, but as a fracture. People could still recall where they were when they first heard about it, the tone of the news, the unease that followed. That kind of memory does not fade. It calcifies. It becomes part of how a place understands itself. There were moments, rare but persistent, when someone thought they saw something. A face in a crowd. A figure in an old photograph. A detail that sparked recognition too late to be useful. Each sighting was followed by doubt, by rational explanation, by the slow realization that hope had once again outrun evidence. The mind, desperate for completion, has a way of inventing possibilities where none exist. The truth, whatever it was, remained suspended beyond reach. It existed somewhere between what was said and what was never proven, between official closure and personal doubt. It did not belong to the courts anymore, and it never fully belonged to the public. It hovered, unresolved, a reminder that not every story bends toward understanding. As time continued its indifferent march forward, the case settled into a strange permanence. Not solved, not forgotten, not truly alive, but not dead either. It became part of the landscape of unanswered questions that define the limits of human certainty. A marker not of failure, but of reality. Of the uncomfortable truth that some mysteries do not yield, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many voices demand answers. And in that lingering space, where closure was declared but never felt, the cold case endured, not as a problem to be fixed, but as an echo that refused to fade, a reminder that the past does not always stay where we leave it, and that silence, when listened to closely, can be louder than any confession ever given. Time has a way of rearranging truth without ever clarifying it. As the decades stretch on, memories thin, witnesses disappear, and certainty becomes a fragile thing, passed from one generation to the next like a rumor that no one remembers starting. By the time the case reached this stage of its afterlife, it no longer belonged to the people who lived through it. It belonged to the idea of it, to the shadow it cast, to the unanswered pull it exerted on anyone who looked too closely. The story began to exist more in absence than in fact. Documents outlasted voices. Transcripts replaced recollections. What had once been urgent became archival, but urgency never truly left. It merely changed form. It surfaced in late-night searches, in quiet moments when someone stumbled across the case and felt the same chill others had felt years earlier. The reaction was always the same. How could this still feel unfinished? How could so much time pass without settling what mattered most? The answer was uncomfortable in its simplicity. Because time does not resolve uncertainty. It only normalizes it. What once shocked the community eventually blended into its history, not as a solved problem, but as a scar. And scars do not vanish. They fade, they harden, they become part of the structure, but they never disappear completely. They remain sensitive beneath the surface, reacting to pressure, to memory, to questions asked too directly. Every anniversary carried a quiet tension. No public ceremonies. No official statements. Just a subtle awareness that another year had slipped by without new truth. The calendar kept moving, indifferent to the weight carried by those who still remembered. For them, time did not advance in years, but in reminders. A song from the early 90s. A photograph from a local archive. A stretch of road at dusk, unchanged except for the passing cars. The narrative had been repeated so many times that it risked becoming accepted by default. The confession. The closure. The end. And yet, each repetition introduced small fractures. Listeners noticed inconsistencies. Readers paused at moments that felt incomplete. The more familiar the story became, the more its gaps stood out. Familiarity did not breed comfort. It bred suspicion. Some began to ask different questions, not about who did it, but about how the conclusion had been reached. About the pressure of years without answers. About the desire for resolution that sometimes outweighed the need for certainty. These questions did not accuse. They observed. They recognized that systems, like people, can grow tired, can crave endings even when endings are premature. The case had taught an entire generation something subtle but profound. That truth is not always delivered with finality. That justice can be declared without being fully understood. That closure, when forced, leaves behind a residue of doubt that no verdict can erase. These lessons were not written into law or policy, but they lingered in the collective awareness of those who had paid attention. For the family, grief transformed again, taking on a quieter shape. Less raw, less immediate, but no less present. It became something they carried without expecting relief. They no longer waited for answers. They waited for acknowledgement, for honesty about what was known and what was not. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that certainty could not be manufactured, and that pretending otherwise only deepened the wound. The town, too, carried on with an inherited awareness. Even those who had never heard the full story sensed its outline. It lived in the way people spoke about the past, careful and selective. It lived in the unspoken agreement that some nights, some places, still felt heavier than others. It lived in the recognition that not everything left behind can be neatly categorized as resolved. The cold case, once an active investigation, now existed as a question mark etched into time. It resisted reinterpretation, resisted closure, resisted disappearance. It stood as evidence not of failure, but of complexity. Of the reality that some truths fracture under scrutiny, revealing not clarity, but layers of uncertainty beneath. And so the story continued, not forward, but outward, rippling quietly through years and minds and memories. It no longer demanded answers. It demanded reflection. It asked those who encountered it to sit with discomfort, to accept that mystery does not always bow to persistence. That sometimes, the most honest ending is the one that admits what cannot be known. In that admission, the case found its strange endurance. Not as a solved puzzle, not as a forgotten tragedy, but as a lingering presence, a reminder that silence can be as revealing as testimony, and that the past, when unresolved, does not fade into history. It waits, patient, unsettled, listening. By the time the case reached this point in its long, uneasy existence, it had stopped asking to be solved and started asking to be understood. Not in terms of facts or timelines or legal conclusions, but in terms of what it revealed about the space between certainty and truth. The space where people live when answers are promised, but never fully delivered. The space where belief replaces evidence and silence becomes its own kind of testimony. The story no longer belonged to the night it began or the year stamped on its file. It belonged to the aftermath, to the slow erosion of confidence, to the realization that some conclusions feel solid only because everyone is too exhausted to keep questioning them. The cold case had become a mirror, reflecting not just a disappearance, but the limits of resolution itself. Those who stumbled upon the case years later often described the same reaction. A sense of imbalance. Something about it felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. They read the summaries, absorbed the official version, reached the end, and then paused. Not because they were confused, but because something inside them resisted moving on. The ending did not land. It hovered. In quiet moments, speculation resurfaced, not as rumor, but as careful reconsideration. What if the confession had been shaped by expectation? What if time had altered memory rather than clarified it? What if the need to close the case had become stronger than the need to question it? These were not accusations. They were echoes. The natural consequence of a story that never fully aligned with itself. The landscape of the town bore no visible trace of the past anymore, but memory does not require landmarks. It survives in tone, in caution, in the subtle ways people respond to uncertainty. Even those who claimed to know nothing about the case reacted when it was mentioned. A pause, a glance away, a shift in posture, as if something dormant had been stirred. The investigation, once driven by urgency, now existed only in fragments. Notes yellowed with age. Recordings archived and rarely replayed. The voices captured on tape sounded distant, almost unreal, like messages from another world. Listening to them now felt intrusive, as if eavesdropping on a moment that never expected to be revisited. Yet the questions they raised remained current, pressing, unresolved. For those who had believed deeply in the resolution, doubt was not an attack, but a slow recalibration. It arrived quietly over years as inconsistencies accumulated, as certainty softened, as confidence gave way to something more cautious, more conditional. They did not abandon the official story all at once. They simply stopped defending it as absolute. The case became a reference point in conversations about justice and memory, about how narratives are constructed, about how endings are declared. It served as a reminder that the passage of time does not purify truth. It complicates it. It layers it with reinterpretation, with loss, with the quiet disappearance of those who might have clarified what remains unclear. The family, still present, still watching from the edges, learned to live with